I heard a story about a Chinese man and a Jewish man that were eating in the same restaurant. And while they were eating, the Jewish man got up, walked over to the Chinese man, and just slugged him right in the face, knocked his head back, just kind of made him dizzy. And the Chinese man, when he finally recovered, said, "What was that for?" He says, and the Jewish man said, "That was for Pearl Harbor." And the Chinese man said, "We didn't have anything to do with Pearl Harbor. That was the Japanese." And the guy said, "Japanese, Taiwanese, Chinese, that's all the same to me." And they both sat down and went back to eating. And after a little while, the Chinese guy got up. He walked over and he slapped that guy right upside the head, knocked him off his chair. And when he got up, he said, "Well, what was that for?" And he said, "That was for the Titanic." "The Titanic? I didn't have anything to do with the Titanic." He said, "Goldberg, Feinberg, iceberg, it's all the same to me." Well, we laugh at that, and yet there are racial undertones behind all of that, and our society is ripped right now with all of this racial friction that's going on. And sad to say, sometimes it erupts in the church. We're talking about saints and snobs. And I have been in churches, and so have you, where you've walked in and nobody greeted you, nobody looked at you, nobody said anything to you. You came in, sat down, went through the whole service and left and walked out, and maybe the preacher shook your hand. Well, thank God we're not a church like that. I have been so appreciative of the fact that East Bartlesville Christian Church is one of the friendliest churches I've ever been in. The problem that we face, however, though, is, do we keep it up? Do we hang in there in the long term? We're doing a good job right now, but it always seems like we need to be reminded of our responsibility to be the friendliest church that's out there. And I hope and pray that we never lose sight of that. Well, we talked about three different things. We talked about the church needing a makeover from James chapter 2. And that makeover is to make us understand that we cannot have judgmental attitudes towards other people. We can't judge them for their size. We can't judge them for their politics. We can't judge them for their clothes. We can't judge them for the car they drive or the house they live in. We can't judge them for the tattoos or the rings that they have throughout their body. And it's real easy to fall prey to looking at somebody's outward appearance or the things that they have and making a rash judgment about who those people are. All of us have been surprised at one time or another when we made a judgment about somebody only to find out later it wasn't true at all. It was completely the opposite of who they were. And so we need to understand that Christians have a responsibility to guard their minds when they're meeting and they're visualizing people, seeing people, that we don't make rash judgments. The understanding is that we have the responsibility not to create a spiritual caste system. I've gone to India and I've gone to Sri Lanka where they have caste systems. My brother, the missionary in Sri Lanka, says the caste system in Sri Lanka is based on how dark you are. The darker you are, the less likely you are to get good jobs, to be married, to make a good living. But the lighter skinned you are, you have the judgment that you're a better person. And as my brother said, you could be uglier than a fence post, but if you've got light skin, they consider you beautiful. And we need to be very, very careful that we don't create a Christian caste system where we put people's looks at a place where we categorize them as different people that are people we want to be around or people that we don't want to have anything to do with. And so we need that makeover. We need to be that friendliest church. We need to be the people that are going to reach out to everybody that walks through the door, and that we share our life with them. Somebody had told the story about Robert E. Lee, and he was in a church service. I guess he was a very spiritual man, and he was in a church service, and in the church service there came in a former slave, and the former slave had gone forward to take communion, and when he did, Robert E. Lee went up and he kneeled right beside the man as they were taking communion. After the service, somebody accosted him and said, "How in the world could you possibly take communion next to that former slave? How could you do that?" And he said, "At the cross, everybody's equal. At the foot of the cross, everybody is on level ground." Let's never forget that. The second thing that we looked at was, why is it wrong to play favorites? And number one, it's judgmentalism. And God says, don't judge lest you be judged. With the judgment you use, you will be judged by that same judgment. So when you and I have a judgmental attitude against somebody because we don't like their appearance or what they appear to be, God says that's the same kind of judgment He will hold us to. And that's certainly not something that we want. He says it's evil. It's sinful. And He goes on to talk about it being the opposite of who God is. God is acceptive of anybody that comes to Him. Anybody that submits to His authority. God has open arms and He welcomes them. I don't care how horrible a sinner they have been. I don't care how many years they've been locked in ungodly behavior. When somebody turns to Him, God has open arms. And the church should resemble that. We have got to be those people as well. And the third thing was, we've got to overcome the prejudice, the partiality, the showing favoritism. And he says that we are to show the royal law. The royal law, of course, is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now that's quite a statement. Love your neighbor as yourself. I pretty much care about me. I want good things for me. I don't want bad things to happen to me. And He's telling us that we are to love our neighbor the same way that we love ourselves. That's the royal law. And when the church finally gets that down pat, and we show that royal law, loving everybody that comes through those doors, or the ones that don't, that are out there in the public arena, that we love them enough to invite them, to share our testimony with them. That is doing the royal law. Remembering that prejudice is sinful. It's outside of God's law. And He says we'll be judged for that. And when you stop and think about God judging us according to the way that we judge others, it ought to make us much more merciful in the way we reach out to other people. And so we want to make sure that we have the attitude of Christ, the attitude of God towards everybody that's out there. I remember one time we were traveling going towards Colorado, and the kids were kind of young in the car, and we'd stop somewhere to go to the restroom and get a drink. And we were loading back up in the car, and there was an old man, and he he was just kind of shuffling, and this has been some 40 years ago. And the old man had on shorts and a tank top, and every exposed part of his body was a tattoo, and that's before tattoos had come into vogue. And he had earrings all the way from the top to the bottom of his ear. To me, it was just a sight. And I made some judgmental comment, and my 8-year-old son just simply said, "Dad, all he needs is Jesus." I stood rebuked. God bless. I hope you have a good study.